I am fiercely feminist. From a very young age, I made it my mission to revolt against the system, and in my mind, the patriarchy is synonymous with oppression. Everything associated with gender roles was negative. I did everything I could to refrain from conforming. I refused to wear pink clothes, I opted to play with cars instead of dolls, I mocked romance novels and stereotypically girly hobbies like shopping, and I was overall suspicious of the structures that put women into any sort of box. Growing up, my mother similarly rejected patriarchal values. Her stepfather constantly berated her to learn how to cook so that she could one day provide for her future husband and children. In response, she refused, angry that she was being burdened with such stereotypical expectations. But upon reflecting on this, she now believes that she shot herself in the foot. She eventually learned to cook for herself, and now wishes that she hadn't fought her stepfather so hard and instead had taken the time to learn from her own mother when she had the chance. Because today, she finds great joy and meaning in cooking for her family, and some of her favorite memories include cooking with and for me. It was this realization that allowed her to recognize that certain aspects of the patriarchy are not, in fact, entirely harmful. The patriarchy is a social system of male dominance and female subordination that permeates all aspects of society. More broadly speaking, patriarchal structures oppress all people by boxing them into prescribed roles. For example, a recent survey conducted by the South Korea Ministry of Gender Equality and Family revealed that 17% of Korean men and women believe that women are primarily responsible for their children, even if they work. As per traditional gender roles for men, the same survey showed that nearly 30% believe that men should be the family breadwinner, and nearly 15% agreed that traditionally female-dominated jobs, that is, care-based careers like nursing, are not suitable for men. The societal expectation that women take on the role of primary caregiver is often viewed as a source of systemic oppression that obstructs progress towards gender equality. I have long seen caregiving as a form of unpaid labor that is something to be resisted against. However, my time in Korea and my research on the resilient THEO divers on Jeju Island, alongside reflections on the experiences of my family and friends, have prompted me to re-examine my assumptions. Through research, introspection, and engagement with Korean culture, I have come to realize that certain values that are associated with the patriarchy, such as caregiving, can in fact be deeply meaningful expressions of love and strength when chosen freely and intentionally. The expectation that Korean women care for others is persistent. It's a duty they must bear even at the expense of their own livelihoods. Within Korean societies, where filial piety is deeply entrenched in Asia's Confucian roots and multi-generational households are the norm, it is expected that children will eventually take care of their own parents. This is very much contrasted with American society, which I will talk more about later. This responsibility to care for the elderly falls disproportionately on women. Dependency on women's unpaid domestic labor is not new, but rather it is a modern manifestation of gendered sacrifice that we have seen throughout history. The devastating legacy of comfort women is one of the most shameful stains on Korea's history, and is representative of how Korean women's bodies and labor have been historically exploited for the good of others. This historical trauma is connected to what scholar Theodore Yu describes as Han, which refers to a collective feeling of unresolved resentment and anger directed at injustices suffered under unfair systemic oppression. When caring for others is forced upon women and is not freely chosen, it becomes yet another instance of gendered subjugation and sacrifice that perpetuates Han. There are many powerful examples throughout history of women challenging the circumstances that contribute to Han. In fact, it is often in times of struggle that women are able to break through the glass ceiling. This is known as the glass cliff phenomenon, which is the theory that women are more likely to succeed in times of turmoil. Quite simply, gender roles are more difficult to stick to when tragedy necessitates that women step up and take the helm. This has been true throughout Korean history, particularly during wartime. On Jeju Island, women called THEO have been able to reclaim some level of power and agency by providing for their families through the dangerous and physically taxing job of freediving for seafood. Limited documentation suggests that this practice began around 1,000 years ago, but it evolved into the famous group of female divers that we know today around the 18th century, when men's widespread conscription into the military disrupted social norms and prompted women to assume the role of the primary breadwinner. The April 3rd uprising in the late 1940s marked another instance where women had to step up and provide for their families. The invaluable contributions that the THEO made began to restructure family roles and redefine femininity. The story of THEO resonates in popular Korean media today, providing a lens through which social norms and roles can be explored. The recently released and critically acclaimed K-drama, When Life Gives You Tangerines, depicts a story of women working to rewrite their fates and break free from restrictive gender roles. The show is a prime example of how Korean femininity has shifted throughout history. It portrays the pressures and generational trauma that young girls face when navigating their own identities and relationships. Set in the 1950s, the pilot episode follows a cynical Han-yo as she repairs her relationship with her spunky daughter. It is clear that the mother is jaded and has been beaten down by grueling work and unjust expectations. Early in the episode, she marvels to her husband,
전부 다 내 지기 위에만 올라타는데 이 콩만한 게 자꾸 내 지게에서 내려와. 자꾸 지가 내 등짐을 같이 들겠대.
Later on, the two share a tender moment as they eat abalones that the mother caught.
그래도 팔면 100환인데.
네 조동리에 들어가면 천안 같아.
She then tells her daughter that her dying wish is that A-sun does everything she can to avoid becoming a housekeeper and doesn't give up her dreams of becoming a poet. In this way, When Life Gives You Tangerines reframes caregiving not simply as an oppressive role, but as a meaningful act when it is chosen freely. Despite this evolution in roles and expectations, gender inequality remains a significant issue in the Republic of Korea. In 2024, the Global Gender Gap Report placed South Korea at 94th out of 146 countries with a gender gap index score of 0.7, meaning that the country was still 0.3 points away from total gender parity in economic participation, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. Diving into more specific statistics, in 2024, 20% of the seats in the national parliament were held by women, compared to a global average of 27%. In recent years, roughly equal shares of Korean women and men own bank accounts, complete lower secondary education, and are literate. Korea is a very literate society, especially compared to America. However, disparities persist in the domestic realm. Research from 2019 shows that Korean women spend 3.4 times as much time on unpaid domestic and care work than men. While more and more women have been able to stay in the workforce, 1.2 million women still step back from their careers after getting married in the past year. Contrasted with Korea's collectivist and group-oriented society, in America, self-reliance is a core tenet. Our nation's motto may be, united we stand, divided we fall, yet we are an exceedingly individualistic society. As outlined by Geert Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory, the United States scores a 91 on the individualism scale, putting us at the #1 most individualistic country in the world. This independence is somewhat encapsulated within the American dream itself. We see the ultimate marker of success as striking off on your own and achieving upward mobility through a successful career. We emphasize self-reliance and see relationships as being temporary and non-intensive. We leave behind relationships when the costs of said relationships outweigh personal gains and when personal goals shift. We ship our parents off to old folks' facilities rather than caring for them in our own homes. I resent the way Korean women in my life have had their opportunities limited because of restrictive expectations to care for others. Last fall, the mother of my best friend from home passed away. She died from gastrointestinal cancer, a disease that seems to plague Koreans despite our frequent kimchi consumption. In the ensuing months, my college-age friend took on the role of caretaker in her family, assisting her mourning father in looking after her younger sister. While I of course admire her tenacity and loyalty, and I would like to think I would have done the same thing in her situation, I couldn't help but feel that it was unfair that she had to hit pause on her education to care for her family. Relatedly, my own mother dropped out of graduate school so that she could settle down and raise children. She had planned to go back to school once my brother and I had grown up, and true to her word, she earned a master's in public health when we reached high school age. However, it is difficult enough to rejoin the workforce after a long hiatus, and as she was interviewing for jobs, a new maternal responsibility emerged. My grandfather's wife had passed away, meaning that my grandfather had to be relocated close to our house so that my mom could care for him. Once again, she was asked to sacrifice her career in favor of taking care of her family. I've always cheered on women breaking free from their proverbial patriarchal shackles. But as America's population rapidly ages, we're headed towards a cliff where the majority of society won't be able to take care of themselves. And in the name of progress, we've often pushed our children away to follow their dreams and abandon their familial responsibilities. We're losing a sense of community, forsaking our own families in the search of creating a new one. I've been blinded by rage towards everything remotely prescriptive, overlooking the potential value in caregiving roles often linked to the patriarchy. In the weeks immediately following our class trip to Korea, I mused that I felt like a different person. After a couple of days, one of my friends called me out, asking, "You keep saying you feel like a different person, but how? What has changed?" I was silent, unsure how to respond. After further reflection and discussion with my classmates, I concluded that I internally felt like a different person because the trip made me feel more present and grateful. I thought about the sacrifices my grandparents made when they immigrated to America, and how much of that history I had taken for granted or was completely unaware of. I was struck by the quiet resilience woven into their history. Resilience that I now recognize in the streets of Seoul, in Busan, in the temples and marketplaces, and in the conversations we shared with local community leaders. I know it may sound like I was just having a cliche, privileged, eat, pray, love moment, but the gratitude I felt and still feel is real. It wasn't performative. It was rooted in a longing to better understand where I came from and a desire to honor that history. Before the seminar, I thought of caregiving as a patriarchal burden placed on women, but through learning about intergenerational relationships and resilient women like the THEO, I've begun to develop a more nuanced understanding of feminism rooted in community and care, not just individuality. I realize that I may have been guilty of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. While I still believe that the patriarchy is the root of most of our problems, I'm coming to terms with the fact that not all patriarchal structures are entirely devoid of value. When caregiving is a choice and not an obligation, it can be an act of strength and cultural preservation. Feminism doesn't have to be a rejection of all that came before us. Feminism can be the reimagining of inherited values in ways that empower us and those that we love. Thank you to everyone who made my revelations possible. My trip to Korea was truly life-changing, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I had to take this class and have these experiences in Korea, and also to my parents and to all of the Koreans in my life for helping me understand where I came from and where I want to go.